The first time Commander Exal saw Earth, he ordered the observation deck sealed. "Radiation levels are fluctuating across the surface," Exal said, adjusting the spectrum filters. "There is no discernible planetary shielding. The atmosphere is thin. The ultraviolet exposure alone would sear our outer membrane layer within 2 rotations. And what is this?" He zoomed in on a storm front over the Pacific. "Cyclonic wind systems larger than our capital city. That ocean is boiling in places." "Correct," said Science Officer Vell. "The temperature variance is extreme. Acidic precipitation in some regions. Volcanic activity continues without pause on multiple continents. And the biosphere is hostile." Exal turned. "Hostile." Vell rotated the holomap, highlighting red zones. "Predators with multi-ton musculature. Insects that inject venom. Mammals capable of coordinated group hunts. There are species that weaponize electricity, Commander." Exal narrowed his gaze. "And yet the humans live there?" Vell hesitated. "They do more than live. They've spread to every environment. Even the deserts and frozen poles." Exal folded his arms. "They built cities in these places?" "Yes, and they irrigated the deserts. They reinforced structures to survive the storms. They even drilled into the tectonic plates for energy. Their global survival rate is statistically absurd." Exal stared at the spinning Earth in silence. "Prepare a delegation mission," he said. "But we will not disembark." "Commander, we will observe from orbit. No one sets foot on that world until I understand how they haven't all died." Frederick Thorne hadn't had a day off in 6 months. His right arm still ached from the last landslide rescue in Utah, and now FEMA had rerouted him to Anchorage. A record cold snap had knocked out power, and an entire senior community was trapped by frozen infrastructure. He was 34, built like a firefighter, and had the facial scars to prove it. His boots crunched as he stepped out of the chopper, frost clinging to his beard before he'd taken 2 breaths. "Thorne!" Someone yelled over the rotor wash. It was Helena Rhodes, the response coordinator, bundled in 3 layers and holding a tablet. "We've got 3 trapped in Building C. Floors buckled under the weight. You're the only one light enough to make the crawl." Frederick nodded, pulled his helmet on, and jogged into the storm. The crawl space was barely 2 feet high. The subfloor creaked beneath him, frost clinging to the pipes. One wrong step and he'd fall into the frozen basement. But he found them, an elderly couple and their nurse, huddled beneath blankets, pale and shaking. "You're gonna be fine," he said, voice calm and steady. "I'm getting you out of here." He didn't mention the fact his fingers had gone numb, or that his ribs still hadn't fully healed from the last job. On the orbiting vessel, Exal watched the footage they'd intercepted from Earth's emergency response satellites. "This man is injured," he said, "and still he continues to plunge into sub-zero ruins to extract others." Vell nodded. "According to research, this is not uncommon. Humans frequently risk their lives for unrelated individuals." Exal leaned closer. "That building could have collapsed at any moment." "Exactly." Exal's eye twitched. "They are not merely surviving. They are thriving in lethal conditions. Voluntarily." Vell hesitated. "Commander, there is a theory forming among the xenopsychology team." "Speak." "That Earth may qualify as a Class 7 death world." Exal stared. "That classification is reserved for uninhabitable planets. Planets that kill anything that sets foot on them." "That is the theory, Commander. Earth should kill everything, but humans call it home." 6 weeks later, Frederick was grounded. His left leg had shattered during a rockfall in Arizona. Compound fracture. Surgery had gone well, but the pins would stay in for months, and the rehab was brutal. He hated being idle. The physical pain was nothing compared to the ache of watching others do the hard work from a wheelchair. Helena visited once, bringing coffee and news. "You see the heat dome in Texas?" she asked. "Yeah," Frederick muttered. "I'd be there if my femur hadn't exploded. You saved that family in the gorge. Anyone else would be dead. Doesn't mean I like sitting still." She laughed. "You're the most stubborn man I know." "I take that as a compliment." Up in orbit, Exal watched again. The human had broken a major limb, immobilized, and still he worked. Coordinating logistics, advising rookies, shouting over radio signals. "Why doesn't he rest?" Exal asked. Vel frowned. "He believes rest is secondary to duty." Exal turned. "Then he is irrational." "Perhaps, but it's not uncommon. Humans possess a cognitive dissonance between self-preservation and social responsibility." Exal tapped the screen. "This is not dissonance. This is compulsion. They seek out threats. They climb mountains for sport. They dive into oceans teeming with predators. They even build machines to simulate death experiences." Vel nodded. "Roller coasters, skydiving, combat simulators. I've cataloged over 200. Exal stepped back, troubled. "They find joy in terror." Once Frederick could walk with a crutch, he didn't wait for clearance. He signed a waiver and rejoined a wildfire containment team in Colorado. The temperature was 106 degrees. Ash rained like snow, and the wind shifted without warning. He helped evacuate a school just before the flames crossed the highway. His legs screamed with every step, but when a child screamed from the back of a smoke-filled hallway, he didn't hesitate. He carried her out, lungs filling with soot, collapsing just as the fire engines rolled in. He woke up in a hospital with a breathing mask and 2 cracked ribs. "You need to stop doing this," Helena said, furious. "And let someone else burn?" he rasped. Exal's crew watched in disbelief. He was injured, then re-injured, and still he ran into fire. Vel sat in silence, reviewing the footage. Exal waved a hand. "Do they all do this? Is he an anomaly?" Vel pulled up statistics. Thousands of humans per year volunteer for high-risk rescue. Many are injured. Some die. They are honored for it, and then replaced by more volunteers. Exal's voice dropped. "They treat their death world as a proving ground." Vel didn't answer. The delegation ship finally touched down outside a military base in Nevada. The humans had agreed to a non-public meeting. The aliens didn't want attention, and the military didn't want panic. Frederick was invited as an unofficial consultant. He thought it was a joke until he saw the ship. Sleek, metallic, completely silent as it hovered. Then the ramp descended. Exal emerged, flanked by 2 guards. He was tall, thin, with skin like polished stone. His expression unreadable. "You are Frederick Thorne," he said. "Yeah. And you're?" "I am Commander Exal of the Xeran Directive." Frederick raised an eyebrow. "You guys always name your titles that dramatically?" Exal paused. "It is not intended to be dramatic." Frederick shrugged. "Fair enough." They walked together, a translator device humming quietly. Exal studied him. "You are injured. Still recovering. Doctor says I'll be walking normal in 2 months. You ran into flames with a broken leg." Frederick looked at him. "Yeah. Thought you guys knew that already." Exal stopped. "Why?" "There was a kid trapped. What was I supposed to do? Wait around and let her die?" "There were others present. You could have delegated." Frederick frowned. "Doesn't work like that. You see someone in danger, you go." Exal stared at him for a long time. "Your planet is lethal," he said finally. "Frozen wastelands, superheated deserts, storms that rip buildings apart, creatures that kill without warning. And yet you stay." Frederick nodded. It's home. Exal gestured toward a screen. We've cataloged over 600 causes of death unique to Earth's environment. Your species should not exist. We do. We adapt. You swim in oceans that can crush you. You settle on fault lines. You build cities in hurricane zones. Frederick smiled. And when something knocks us down, we rebuild. Exal folded his arms. You treat disaster as routine. Frederick's smile faded. No, we just don't quit. Exal was quiet for a moment. We assumed Earth was a death world. Frederick looked around. You're not wrong, but you call it home. Frederick exhaled. Home sweet home. Exal nodded slowly. I believe I understand now. The delegation left the next day. No treaties were signed. No grand announcements were made. But the Xeran Directive withdrew its classification of Earth as an uninhabitable zone. Instead, they assigned it a new label, Cautionary Class X, inhabited by resilient anomalies. Frederick never heard that part. He went back to physical therapy, back to the long grind of getting his strength back. 2 months later, he was walking without pain. And when a hurricane leveled a town in Louisiana, he was on the first chopper out. Because it was what he did. Because Earth was brutal and terrifying and sometimes beautiful. Because it was home. The air inside the research module smelled like ionized copper and sterilized rubber. Commander Exal had requested complete atmospheric isolation from the Earth environment, despite the fact that the sealed Nevada base already ran internal filtration. He stood motionless near the viewport, watching the horizon where mountains crouched like folded fists beneath a bruised sky. Has the human left the perimeter? He asked. He returned to the southern coastline, replied Vel, who was now operating a skeletal frame of monitoring arms from a standing control ring. New environmental hazard. A water surge event. Tsunami. Storm tide combined with urban drainage collapse. The local infrastructure was not designed for compound flood events. Exal clicked his lower mandible. And yet they remain. They are reinforcing the seawalls with mechanical rigs. The human Frederick was seen carrying sandbags despite his soft tissue still recovering from subdermal anchor implants. Exal rotated slowly. He is not a soldier, not ranked, not genetically enhanced. He is not required to do any of this. Vel tapped a button. A grainy feed on the side panel showed Frederick knee-deep in brown water, passing off supplies to a teenager in a life vest. His leg moved stiffly. The surgical brace was visible beneath soaked cargo pants. He's been discharged from medical care less than 1 cycle, Vel muttered. This is not rational behavior. It is not, but it is consistent. The third figure in the room finally stepped forward. Researcher Trin, newer to the command vessel, had been silent since arrival, absorbing every data point like dry soil drinks rain. They don't operate on efficiency, she said. Their logic is relational, contextual. That's why our models failed. Exal narrowed his gaze. Explain. Every action is filtered through personal meaning, not outcome. If a stranger is suffering, it becomes personal. If a threat is distant, they bring it closer. They don't calculate risk the way we do. Vel glanced sideways. You're saying they behave irrationally because it feels correct? Trin nodded. Precisely. Emotional rationale is the driving engine. And it's not a weakness. It's why they endure. Exal turned back to the screen. Frederick was now using a modified dolly to ferry elderly evacuees from one submerged intersection to a fire truck platform. His movements were labored. The knee joint had limited flexion. Every step looked like it cost him. Why doesn't he stop? Exal said quietly. Because someone else didn't, Trin said. Exal didn't respond. He watched another 30 seconds, then gestured the monitor off. Schedule an observational descent, he said. Vel blinked. You intend to leave the module? I intend to understand. It took 2 hours to secure the permits. The humans insisted on full disclosure of the visiting team's non-biological elements, and the Xeran delegation agreed to wear visible filtration gear to avoid misinterpretation by local civilians. By the time they arrived on the outskirts of the flood zone, the rain had stopped, but the streets were still thick with debris. Fallen signage floated in oily water. Power lines drooped like wet rope. Frederick was sitting on the tailgate of a fire rescue truck, left ankle elevated on a folded tarp. One of the medics had taped a temporary pressure wrap around his ankle. His hands were scraped raw. A plastic bottle of water sat unopened beside him. He looked up when he heard the hum of the approaching vessel. It wasn't loud, but it was out of place, too smooth, too intentional. When the ramp descended, he raised an eyebrow. No offense, he said, but this is a weird time for a social call. Exal stepped down carefully, followed by Trin and Vel. Each wore a translucent polymer suit that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Trin scanned the surroundings with a handheld biosensor, but Vel kept his gaze fixed on Frederick. I did not expect to find you seated, Exal said. Frederick grunted, adjusting the wrap on his ankle. Twisted the ligaments. Probably shouldn't have jumped the barricade, but the water was rising too fast for detours. You are injured again. Nothing permanent. I've had worse. Exal glanced at Trin, then back at Frederick. We've been reviewing your species' behavior in environmental crisis scenarios. There is no mathematical consistency, no predictive logic. Some of you run toward danger, others freeze, a few panic. But the ones who act your kind seem to do so without any reward. Why? Frederick took a slow sip from the water bottle, then wiped his face with the back of his arm. It's not about reward. It's about not standing still when you can move, even if you're limping. Vel stepped forward. But the probability of death increases with every exposure. You are aware of this. Sure. But if someone's trapped, and I can help even if it's a long shot, I'll take it. Trin watched him quietly. You're not even trained in hydrodynamic engineering. What made you think you could reinforce a drainage wall with improvised debris? It held, didn't it? That's not an answer. Frederick shrugged. Didn't need to be perfect. Just needed to hold for 15 minutes. That's all we needed to get the last van through. Exal tilted his head. You calculate success in increments. That's the only way it's manageable. You don't aim to fix the whole thing. You aim to fix the next thing. Trin recorded that. Micro-resilience, she said under her breath. Is that what you're calling it? Frederick asked. It's a working term. A small group of volunteers passed by, pushing a flat-bottomed boat filled with supplies. One of them nodded to Frederick. He nodded back. His fingers were still trembling slightly from adrenaline withdrawal. You look exhausted, Trin said. I am. But you're still here. Where else would I be? Vel looked around. Anywhere safer. Anywhere cleaner. Anywhere functioning. Frederick leaned forward. Let me ask you something. If your people had a colony ship, and it crash-landed in a place like this, what would you do? We'd evacuate. No ship, no backup. Just you and what you brought. Vel hesitated. We would likely perish. Frederick nodded. That's the difference. We didn't wait for rescue. We became it. Exal stepped closer. Are you saying your entire civilization is built around survival improvisation? Not just survival. Continuation. We don't want to just not die. We want to keep going. Keep building. Even if it's uphill in the rain with a busted leg and no clear path. Trin blinked slowly. You normalize suffering. No. We don't let it win. A breeze stirred the wet air. Somewhere in the distance, a generator coughed to life. Frederick stood carefully, testing his weight on the ankle. He winced but didn't sit back down. "You're going back out?" Exal asked. "There's a collapsed pharmacy 2 blocks over. People need insulin." Vel looked baffled. "You do not possess medical training." "I know where the refrigeration units are." Exal raised a hand. "We will accompany you." Frederick arched a brow. "You sure? It's slippery. And I'm not carrying anyone." "We will observe," Trin said. They followed him through the broken street, stepping over drifted gravel and tumbled recycling bins. As they approached the building, a dog barked from a rooftop. The pharmacy was half submerged, the glass door already shattered. Frederick climbed through without hesitation. Inside, the shelves had collapsed. A cooler in the back buzzed faintly. Frederick opened it, pulled out a crate of sealed syringes, and stuffed them into a rescue sack. "Temperature's still under control," he said. "We're lucky." "You call this luck?" Vel asked. Frederick looked at him. "Absolutely. I've seen worse." They exited the building just as the clouds parted. Sunlight broke through, throwing jagged shadows across the wet concrete. Frederick handed the sack off to a passing medic. "You're not staying?" Trin asked. "They've got it from here. I've got to check on a guy who got a nail through his foot. Might need tetanus." As he limped away, Exal remained still. "He is not unique," Vel said quietly. "No," Exal replied. "But he is instructive." Trin nodded. "They endure not because they are the strongest, but because they refuse to be anything else." They returned to the vessel in silence. The smell of mildew and hydraulic fluid clung to the underside of the collapsed overpass. Rainwater pooled in shallow gutters, carrying with it the film of engine oil, wet leaves, and crushed plastic. Beneath the concrete shell, Frederick adjusted the lopsided shoulder strap of a canvas duffel, the weight of its contents pulling awkwardly against his still healing back. "You're certain this is the optimal route?" Trin asked from behind, ducking beneath a rusted guardrail. She was already sweating inside the thermal-sealed observation suit, though the ambient air was barely over 70. "No," Frederick said, "but it's the one without traffic." Vel, trailing behind with a portable scanner, paused to scan the broken pavement. "There are signs of structural instability. Stress fractures in the load-bearing segment." "Then don't stand under it too long," Frederick said, stepping over a chunk of rebar. "You wanted to see how we move through this stuff." "Here's how." Exal remained silent, walking a pace behind the others. His attention was on the distant skyline, where cranes moved like slow insects over the recovering infrastructure. The storm had passed 3 days ago, and already the city was grinding back to life. Power had returned to most districts. Supply lanes were reopening. But the underpasses hadn't been cleared yet, too unstable, too low on the priority list. Frederick stopped at a tilted service hatch. "This'll take us through the maintenance corridor under the old metro line. Comes out near the pharmacy depot." Vel peered over his shoulder. "This structure has not been maintained for over 2 decades. "Exactly. No one else will be in it." The tunnel was damp and narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people. Frederick led the way with a flashlight taped to a pipe wrench, the beam flickering across water-stained walls. Their boots echoed in the confined space. "Watch your step. There's a drop near the middle." Trin touched the wall for balance. "You navigate this without mapping?" Frederick grunted. "Mapped it once. Rest is memory. But you could become disoriented. Then I take a nap and try again." Vel frowned. "That is not a solution." "It is if you're tired enough." They reached the end of the corridor 20 minutes later. Frederick climbed first, pushing aside a rusted grate and hauling himself onto a cracked sidewalk. His breath fogged briefly in the cooler surface air. Trin climbed after him, slipping slightly on the wet concrete. This level of exposure to environmental contaminants is daily life here, Frederick interrupted. You start waiting for it to be clean, you never get anything done. They crossed the street to the depot, an old civic center now retrofitted with industrial shelving and backup generators. Inside, a tired-looking woman in scrubs took the duffel bag from Frederick, checked the labels, and handed him a clipboard. You should sit down, she said. You're limping. Nothing new, Frederick replied, scribbling his name. The insulin's still cold. Should last another 12 hours. The woman nodded and turned away, already focused on distribution. Frederick leaned against the wall, pressing a hand to his side. His ribs still protested when he moved too fast. He hadn't told anyone about the cough that came when he slept too flat. Exal stood nearby, arms folded. That was more than 30 pounds of supplies. Felt like 50, Frederick muttered. You carried it through unstable terrain, with limited oxygen circulation, while injured. We've been over this. No, we haven't, Exal said. We've observed, but we haven't understood. Frederick sighed and sat on a stack of sealed water containers. You're not gonna like the answer. Try me. We don't wait to be whole before we help. If I waited until I was fully rested, fully healed, fully ready, nothing would ever get done. Trin joined them, pulling off her gloves. The suit had fogged around her collar. You normalize discomfort to the point of ignoring it, she said. That's not adaptation. That's erasure. No, Frederick replied. It's prioritization. I'll deal with me when the rest of this is stable. Vel paced slowly near the supply racks. It's statistically improbable that your kind continues to function long-term under these conditions. We don't pretend it's sustainable. We just keep going until it works. Exal looked around the depot. Volunteers moved with quiet urgency, sorting boxes, checking labels, loading carts. No one shouted. No one stopped. Is this what defines you? He asked. Endurance without pause? Frederick shook his head. No. What defines us is we don't do it alone. A young man approached the entrance, cradling a broken arm in a makeshift sling. A woman barely out of her teens guided him gently to a cot. She wasn't a nurse. Her hoodie read, Community College Track Team. Exal followed his gaze. These aren't trained personnel, he said. They are now. Trin looked puzzled. They've had no instruction. They didn't wait for it. Vel's scanner beeped softly. He ignored it. You don't train your responders in advance? Sometimes, Frederick said. But when everything breaks at once, you don't need experts. You need people who show up. Trin folded her arms. That seems inefficient. It is. But it works. Exal took a long breath, then turned toward the exit. We have seen enough. They walked back through the corridor in silence. Frederick's pace was slower now, the adrenaline worn off. At one point, he stumbled against a loose pipe. Vel caught his arm without comment. When they emerged into daylight, the sky had begun to clear again. The smell of scorched rubber still lingered under the wind, but it was fading. You gonna write a report about all this? Frederick asked. Yes, Exal replied, but not the kind we expected. I figured. Trin adjusted her gear. You'll continue these efforts? Until they're not needed. Vel looked back at the depot. And if they always are? Then we keep showing up. Back at the transport vessel, the crew disengaged their suits and ran decontamination cycles. Exal remained by the viewport, watching the human walk toward a group of teenagers unloading bottled water from an open truck bed. His limp was more pronounced now. He didn't slow down. Trin reviewed her notes silently, then closed the tablet. They're not anomalies, she said. They're the baseline. Exal nodded. Then our models must change. Vel adjusted a display panel, replacing the previous classification tag. Earth, he said aloud, occupied by a stubborn, cooperative, pain-tolerant species with a disregard for standard survival logic. Trin tilted her head. Resilient anomalies? No, Exal said. Resilient normalcy. They left orbit 12 hours later. No treaties were filed. No resources requested. No technologies exchanged. But in the central archive of the Xeran Directive, under the updated catalog of habitable worlds, the entry for Earth now included a single line of advisory protocol. Do not intervene. Observe quietly. Learn if possible. And under no circumstances underestimate the humans.